Okay, so the first thing I did was research. What did I want to learn about? I decided I wanted to learn about plants. Tried to go for native, but couldn't find any at my local nursery, so I found this oxalis. And here is a little picture of one. It's a 2-inch one, and I decided that I wanted to make something with it. More than just it looked pretty and how I'm going to take care of it, but what can I do with this plant? And I decided I can make a dye with it. So I've got a couple materials that I'm testing it on. I've got some basic drawing paper, and then I've got this, it's almost like a canvas, but it's harder, same kind of material, good for watercolors. And then I've got some darker colored paper and then some lighter colored paper. And then a couple swatches of fabric from a dress my sister was making, and it's got some pin marks on it. And then some 100% cotton string, because I figured that's what it will adhere best to. So I researched that you're supposed to dip it in water, all of your materials, because it'll adhere the dye better. Okay, now I've got some peroxide. I'm going to clean my shears with this. You should never take shears to a plant unless you've cleaned them beforehand. You can use alcohol or peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide, I think, is a little better for you than alcohol, so that's why I'm using this. So I dipped it in there, and I realized the ink from the pen is spreading into the water. So I quickly switched those out, got some fresh water for everything, and was on my way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all the stem and the leaves, and I'm going to kind of trim them up a little bit. I started with a knife, and I realized scissors works way better. All of this was not written down. Like, I thought of all this as I went. This is really what I believe kids, how they learn. It reminded me so much of when I was making like mud pies when I was a child. So this is the first time I actually started to look at teaks. These are actually the Tennessee educator standards, which are really cool. Okay, so 30 minutes passed by and it did nothing. So I put a lid on it to try and see if that would change the water. And lo and behold, it's very difficult to see on camera, but it is a very light pink. So I went ahead and strained the leaves out. Oh, look at that, it's pink. So I put some of it back into a little bowl so I could dip all my fabrics in there. And I also had some cotton balls that I put in there too, just because I figured, hey, it's cotton, right? And then I tried painting, and it just looked like I got water wet, or paper wet. And then that happened. So I started the process over again. I went back to Callaway's, the plant nursery, and I got a bigger plant, and I cut a whole lot more trimmings off, put the same amount of water, and just repeat the whole process again. Again, this is something that I feel like is very intuitive for kids to want to try again. Here I am straining it, and just look at the color difference here. It's so much darker. So I googled to find out how to make it thicker because it was still really thin, and they said baking soda and honey. Not at the same time though. So I tried baking soda and was very amazed when this happened, and a little confused, as you can see. And then it was still really thin, so then I called my parents and they suggested putting starch in the water because starch thickens water. So I tried that and it got really thick. So then it was time to make my painting. That was the whole point of making this ink, so I could paint. So I started thinking of something that I could hang up in my classroom that I think would be really meaningful. And since I was using starch, I decided to put the whole thing green, by the way, instead of pink, because it just held better onto the canvas. Since there was starch on it, I could kind of carve away what I didn't want on there anymore. And that brings us to real life. So these are the final results. Here's my cotton, 100% cotton thread. Oh, it's very difficult to see. So it didn't really work. You can see I got a little bit of starch right there on that one, so it turned green. But this whole thing was submerged for several hours, and Most of it's already back to white, and I feel like if I were to rinse this, it would probably all turn back to white. There's very little purple in there. Here's the cotton ball, which, hey, I think it turned out pretty good. Again, I think if I rinsed it, it would all come off. And then here's our fabric swatches. Like the creases, it looks kind of tie-dye. I think there may be better results if I were to put this in the sun and then wash it, but I don't know. But yeah, so that's how that worked. Not very well. The last thing that I made was this painting, which I feel like sums up exactly what I want to be very conscious of when I'm a teacher, and what I feel like the two books that I picked out were really focusing on, and that is intention. It's more than just what I want my students to learn and what I think is valuable for them to learn, but really thinking about the effects that learning has on my kids and how it can be way more important than a letter grade. And this is kind of like my core value that I've learned from these books, is that intention is far more valuable than words. And carrying out that intention, not just saying you're going to do something and then taking back what you've said. There's one really powerful quote. It says, "Intentions that are blind to their own motivations." So what I was trying to represent in this painting is that intention is very important, but you have to know where you stand. Which is kind of where I got the wildflowers from here. And so if you were in last semester's class with us, then this back here was my final project. And it was all about how I belong with the wildflowers and how I value my students as wildflowers. And to know that those are my motivations. My kids are my motivation, and my intention has to align with my kids, or it's not going to work. Nobody's going to learn from that kind of environment and thrive in that environment. So yeah, thanks for following along. And now I've got a little activity for us to do in class.